Hey everybody, this is section 5 of chapter 3 of Charles Bettelheim's class struggle in the USSR, 1930 to 1941, part 1, The Dominated. Chapter 3 is titled The Kolkhoz System. Section 5 is titled The Subordination of the Kolkhozes to the Requirements of State Accumulation. As is known, the kolkhoz system comprised 3 elements: familial agriculture, the kolkhoz, and the collection of administrative structures which dominated the kolkhoz and allowed the state to obtain from agriculture a, quote, tribute, end quote, which was regular and as high as possible. The principal function of the system was to contribute to the growth of accumulation in the state sector. The principal function of the system was to contribute to the growth of accumulation in the state sector. The subordination of the, quote, collective farms, end quote, to a collection of administrative structures placed, quote, above, end quote, them, was made necessary by the heavy and contradictory obligations which weighed on the kolkhozes. For example, the latter had to assure the state sector of the material means required by the process of accumulation. At the same time, they had to, quote, satisfy the needs for extra labor power, end quote, which the industrialization process engendered. These 2 requirements came into contradiction when an excessively intense, quote, drainage, end quote, of labor power from agriculture to industry disorganized agricultural production and threatened the supply to the state of the material means necessary for accumulation. These contradictions in the organizational forms through which they were, quote, treated, end quote, during the 1930s are highly significant. They should therefore be examined in order to grasp what exactly was the overall kolkhoz system. Section A. The contradictions affecting the size and form of the, quote, tribute, end quote, and the place of the kolkhozes in the system of state structures. From the beginning of, quote, collectivization, there could be seen the development of a sharp contradiction between the effort of the state apparatus seeking to maximize the material supplies currently delivered to the state by the kolkhozes, and on the other side, the effort aiming to increase this supply for subsequent years. This contradiction manifested itself in concrete terms during the first half of the 1930s when the, quote, tribute, end quote, reached such a size that the standard of living of the kolkhozniks drastically fell, which had a negative effect on their labor productivity and even on their numbers, and hence resulted in poor harvests. Footnote: in an article titled Some Thoughts on the Soviet Agricultural Administration, published in Studies on the Soviet Union, 1964, Alec Nove observes, quote, the party and state interest was divided between 3 main objectives, which were sometimes inconsistent with one another: to get resources out of agriculture, parenthesis, procurement, accumulation, and parenthesis, to control and change the peasants, and lastly to increase output and efficiency, end quote. Alec Nove, 1964. And footnote: at the beginning of the 1930s, the party gave priority to the maximization of supplies currently extorted from the kolkhozes, regardless of living conditions and output in the, quote, collective, end quote, farms. At the beginning of the 1930s, the party gave priority to the maximization of supplies currently extorted from the kolkhozes, regardless of living conditions and output in the quote collective end quote farms. To ensure respect for this priority, the kolkhoz system was subordinated as much as possible to the directives and plans of the state, and hence there was an extension of quote planning from above end quote, which was extended to the production and deliveries of the kolkhozes. In this matter, the latter were placed practically on the same footing as the state farms. The party organization and the state fixed for the kolkhozes, just as for the sovkhozes, sowing plans for different products, and they installed a control system which aimed to force the kolkhozes to achieve their plans for productions and deliveries. The fictitious character of quote autonomy end quote, that the quote collective farms end quote, were said to enjoy thereby became clear from the first 5-year plan and was confirmed during the second plan. What happened during the 1930s clearly reveals, moreover, that the kolkhozes were subordinated to the party, but the form of this subordination varied over time. What happened during the 1930s clearly reveals, moreover, that the kolkhozes were subordinated to the party, but the form of this subordination was varied over time. At the beginning of, quote, collectivization, end quote, the responsibility of directing and controlling the kolkhozes lay principally, at least formally, on the machine and tractor stations, (MTS), although the local party authorities, at district level, were supposed to supervise the operations of the MTS. My footnote. This responsibility is confirmed by a decree of the 1st of February 1930. See Alec Nova, An Economic History. End footnote. There was here a sort of confusion of responsibility, and the January 1933 plenum of the Central Committee sought to eliminate this by the creation of functional political departments attached to the machine tractor station. The machine tractor stations, I should say, plural. The political department, Politodel, was a party organization directly subordinated to the Central Committee and not to the Secretary of the District Committee. Thus the kolkhozes were under the direction of the superior party offices. The head of the Politodel was deputy director of the machine and tractor stations, and each Politodel included a representative of the GPU, who therefore also participated in the quote management end quote, of quote collectivized end quote agriculture. The quote cooperative end quote character of the kolkhoz that Stalin emphasized in 1932 then became especially fictitious, and in January 1933 Stalin said something quite different. Footnote. See, for example, Stalin's speeches of March 26, June 25, 1932. End footnote. He then stated that the party, quote, ... must now take over the direction of the collective farms, assume responsibility for the collective farms' work. The party must enter into all the details of collective farm life, end quote. Stalin's speech of 11th of January 1933. This, quote, taking in hand, end quote, took the form of constant interference in kolkhoz activity, very numerous arrests of kolkhoz cadres, and mediocre material results. This led not to a change in the, quote, style, end quote, of kolkhoz managements, but rather to a strengthening of their subordination. At the beginning of 1934, a decree of March 4th ordered the administrative organs of agriculture, the machine and tractor stations, and the kolkhozes to carry out their operations according to a plan. The government additionally promulgated a model plan for the collective farms, and it was stated that this plan should be, quote, followed without any deviation, end quote. The key element of this plan were the obligatory deliveries to the state, parenthesis, from 1932, these deliveries replaced the old contractatia, in parenthesis. However, the Politadel system was not long in showing its faults. Where am I? However, the Politadel system was not long in showing its, quote, faults. It was stated in particular that certain heads of political departments had a tendency to, quote, protect, end quote, the kolkhozes, for which the heads of those political departments had responsibility against the excessive demands of the delivery plan. Certain high leaders of the party even began to talk of, quote, anti-state tendencies, end quote. Footnote: on this point, see the remarks of leaders such as S. Kosior, P. Postishev, and I. Verikis, quoted in Zelenin and Aleknova in Economic History. End footnote. Thus, the plenum of November 1934 abolished the Politadel system. True, the machine and tractor stations retained a deputy director with explicitly political responsibilities, but the latter did not have his own administrative apparatus and had no longer any particular power in relation to the local party organization. However, the kolkhozes continued to occupy a subordinate position in the system of administrative structures entrusted with the management of agriculture and the requisitioning for the state of those agricultural products subject to such delivery. The cadres of the kolkhozes were in an inferior situation with the, quote, triangle, end quote, that was supposed to manage kolkhoz affairs. The, quote, triangle, end quote, consisted of party officials, government officials, and the kolkhoz cadres representing the kolkhozes. The list of governmental organizations to which the cadres of the kolkhozes were in practice subordinated was long. The machine and tractor stations on which each kolkhoz depended for the major field works, the executive committee of the district soviet, parenthesis, Rise Polkom, in parenthesis, the village soviet, and the local organization of the agricultural commissariat. These organizations participated in the preparation of plans and the checking of their execution. For agricultural operations, the surveillance tasks were entrusted to the machine and tractor stations and the agricultural commissariat. From 1935, the executive committee of the district soviet prepared, at the end of each year, an annual economic development program which included a plan for the kolkhozes. From 1935, the executive committee of the district soviet prepared at the end of each year an annual economic development program which included a plan for the kolkhozes. This plan was transmitted to the latter through the intermediary of the machine and tractor stations and the local organizations of the agricultural commissariat. The plan fixed the kolkhoz tasks in the matter of production, specialization, rotation of crops, livestock, mechanization, expenses, the scheduling of various operations, and naturally deliveries to the state. The kolkhoz could not make any modifications to the tasks assigned to the government, even if they were in contradiction with the crop rotation plan adopted previously or with the requirements of agricultural technique. At most, the kolkhoz could, quote, submit objections to the party district committee or to the regional administration of the locality, end quote. But the kolkhoz could elaborate a planned project for the, quote, supplementary harvest, end quote, specifying the material means, human and financial, that its achievement required. This project had to conform to official directives. It was submitted to the local organizations of the Agricultural Commissariat, which could modify it. After modification, the Commissariat organizations integrated it into the kolkhoz plan, and it became obligatory. The regulations fixed in this way reduced to a minimum the freedom of action of the kolkhozes and their managements. Despite the apparently important role that state organizations, particularly the Agricultural Commissariat, played, it was the party organizations which occupied the dominant position in the management and control of kolkhoz activity, even though in principle they were not supposed to intervene in production problems. In fact, they constantly meddled in kolkhoz affairs, even in the periods when such interference was not encouraged by the central leadership of the party, as was the case in 1935 when Stalin emphasized, in a speech of February 15th, that the kolkhozes should be left with the solution of their own problems, and the administrative decisions should not be imposed upon them. The intervention of the party in kolkhoz affairs was connected with the burdens that weighed upon the kolkhoz economy. To ensure that the kolkhoz economy did not shrink its obligations, the party committee intervened at any moment in, quote, collective farm and, quote, affairs. At the beginning of 1940, the situation was such that Pravda was deploring that, quote, district party committees, raycom, had been transformed into a kind of district agricultural office, end quote. Pravda, March 22nd, 1940. The cadres of local party organizations intervened all the more in the life of the kolkhozes because they were in practice held responsible for the conduct of agriculture in their district. Finally, at the beginning of the 1940s, this responsibility was officially placed on them. Firstly, a decree of March 18, 1940, charged the raycom with organizing crop rotation. Then at the beginning of 1941, the raycom was charged with organizing the management of kolkhozes and directly supervised the application of party and government directives in the villages. Thus there developed an extremely heavy agricultural administration. It was so extensive that on the eve of World War II, there were more cadres not belonging to the kolkhozes, but occupied in the management of the latter than there were kolkhoz chairmen. In these circumstances, the kolkhoz was reduced to the role of a simple organ of implementation. It was not only the kolkhoznik who, quote, was left aside from all control and organization of production, end quote, but also the chairman of the kolkhoz himself, who was only the executant of the decisions made by the raycom and the Reichspolkom. Section B. The real scope of the kolkhoz cooperative statute. Ultimately, the kolkhoz cooperative statute was based on a fiction, because the fundamental principles that this statute implied were not respected. In fact, all the decisions important for the life of the kolkhoz were decided externally and in advance by the party and government organizations. Such was the case for the deductions made from kolkhoz funds, for the forms of work decentralization, for the form of remuneration, etc. All these questions give rise to decisions taken outside the kolkhoz and which had to be accepted by this latter, including, when appropriate, the General Assembly of Kolkhozniks. The latter then functioned as a means of fictitiously transforming a decision taken outside the kolkhoz into a decision, quote, unanimously adopted, end quote, by the kolkhozniks, thereby conferring a, quote, legitimacy, end quote, which otherwise it would not have had. The General Assembly of kolkhozniks then functioned as a means of fictitiously transforming a decision taken outside the kolkhoz into a decision, quote, unanimously adopted, end quote, by the kolkhozniks, thereby conferring a, quote, legitimacy, end quote, which otherwise it would not have had. This form of, quote, legitimation, end quote, is typical of, quote, Soviet democracy, end quote, of the 1930s. The authorities could bring this about as soon as they disposed of means of pressure, parenthesis, like the expulsion or even arrest of recalcitrants, end parenthesis. That was sufficient to allow the constraint on the consensus to bring about constraint, quote, by the consensus, end quote. The authorities could bring this about as soon as they disposed of means of pressure, parenthesis, like the expulsion or even arrest of recalcitrants, end parenthesis. That was sufficient to allow the constraint on the consensus to bring about constraint, quote, by the consensus, end quote. Naturally, the constant violation of the kolkhoz statutes did not solve any deep problem. It could only make their management more bureaucratic, more remote from production realities, and more conflict-ridden. Hence the so frequent reminders from the party leadership that the, quote, cooperative character of the kolkhoz, end quote, should be respected. But these reminders were in contradiction with other declarations demanding the local authorities should intervene in the details of kolkhoz life. These contradictions between two official declarations only reflect objective contradictions. The latter were born from the need to extract a maximum tribute from the kolkhozes to support the current policy of accumulation and industrialization. However, this need entered into conflict with the will of the peasantry, which tried to keep for itself the biggest share of the product of the peasantry's labor. At every moment, it even came into contradiction with another necessity, that of maintaining or possibly increasing the productive capacity of the kolkhozes. The kolkhoz chairman found himself at the center of these contradictions. On the one hand, his task was to respond positively to the requirements of the central authorities, of whom he was, in effect, one of the executive agents. Parenthesis, although juridically he was said to be, quote, elected, end quote, by the kolkhozniks, end parenthesis. On the other hand, the kolkhoz chairman had to deal with economic requirements of, quote, his, end quote, kolkhoz, and the discontent of the kolkhozniks. Up to a certain point, the kolkhoz chairman had to satisfy the demands of the kolkhozniks, because failure to do so could make it impossible to obtain productive labor. These contradictions made the position of kolkhoz chairman all the more delicate, because the principal obligation that was imposed on the kolkhoz chairman was to guarantee that the kolkhoz functioned above all as a provider of as much surplus labor as was possible. The fictitious nature of the kolkhoz cooperative statute and the contradictions in which their chairmen were trapped was demonstrated throughout the 1930s and on the eve of the war by the, quote, waltz of the kolkhoz chairman, end quote. This phenomenon was caused by the attempt made by several of them to resist, quote, excessive demands, end quote, by the party, and by the wish of the party to shatter such resistance. Some figures show the scale of this phenomenon. In 1933, an investigation carried out over a larger part of the territory of the USSR showed that in the course of the single year, 36% of kolkhoz chairmen were changed. In 1932, 46% of these chairmen had been in office for less than 1 year. Figures of the same order could be cited for 1939 and 1940. These figures adequately confirm the contradictions in the kolkhoz system and the fictitious character of the cooperative statute of the, quote, collective farms, end quote. That's the end of this section. The next section, section 6, is titled The Consequence for the Authorities of the, quote, socialization, end quote, of agriculture. Thank you so much for listening.